This is Leslie Kane, and you're listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy, and I've got the first guest of 2023 on with me, feeling re-energised and happy to be back. I'd like to bring in UK-based investigator, researcher and author of the ever-popular Truthproof series. I've got Paul Sinclair on the podcast with me. Paul, welcome.
Andy, thank you. It's been a long time coming, and I'm really happy to be talking to you today.
It is Paul. Paul was meant to be on last month, but just because of the excessive fee that he was asking for, we had to negotiate back and forward. And no, not at all.
You weren't supposed to tell him that.
No, that's it. Listen, life gets in the way, doesn't it? I'd just been on your podcast a few days before we were due to record, and
That's
festive
correct.
period, things moving about. It's been delayed slightly, but I think good timing to kick off the new year, Paul, with the conversation as well, because I don't get enough UK-based folks on. So genuinely, I don't just say this. Whenever I've put out over the last year and a half, 2 years of asking for guest suggestions, your name comes up so often with people saying Paul Sinclair, and that's from both sides of the pond. That's, from the US and the UK. So I was honoured to be on your own podcast back in December 2022. I've put the link for that in the description if anyone wants to check it out. But I've already talked too much in a minute and a half, Paul. So listen, for any listeners unfamiliar with you and your work, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
My background, before writing the Truthproof books, I've been a joiner from 16 to 48 years old. Packed in work after working with these all my life, and I'd always had the inclination that I'd write a book about unexplained phenomena due to things that happened to me in childhood. So it's always been there. Some people might think, oh, this guy's just appeared, but I haven't. I've been sort of researching and looking, if research is the word, Andy, but I've been looking into these things. I would have thought, as long as I can remember. So I wrote the first book, Truthproof book, I think 2016, and I've done 5 books now, and that's it for books for now, because we're working on the documentaries. And it was just a combination of multi-phenomena research. That's another thing that I'm always keen to stress, that I'm not a UFO researcher, I'm not a cryptid researcher, poltergeist, ghosts. It's multi-phenomena. Because my own belief, it doesn't mean I'm right, but my own belief is all of this is linked in some inexplicable way, but it's linked, so even by location, because as many times as you'll know with people that you've spoken to and work that you've done, you'll find that there'll be a UFO sighting, but if you look into the area, you find that there's an absolute multitude of other strange things happen, which probably go back decades and before. That's just fascinating.
You've already touched on a few things I was going to get to in the next couple of questions, which is good. You've lined me up. You mentioned your own experiences going back. Would you like to touch on some of those? Like, do they go back as early as childhood?
Oh gosh, yeah. That's where it came from, and I never really spoke about them till I think I was fortunate. I've been doing a lot of research back in 2002 to 2009 on what we called the Wolds light forms, these spheres of light that were appearing on the East Yorkshire Wolds, and this will relate to what your question in a moment. And I'd been putting it on the internet, and if you remember UFO Casebook and Brian Vike's UFO Reporting Centre, back then they were prominent sites. Well, Whitley Strieber had seen some of the stuff I'd been putting on, and he contacted me and said, would you like to speak on Dreamland about these UFOs, this footage that you've been taking? And I didn't feel ready to do that. However, when I wrote the first book, I'm thinking, right, I need to promote this. I need to get it out there. And I contacted him again, 2015. And he said, instantly, just, yeah, sure, you can speak about it. But we ended up speaking about my experiences as well. It was like cork coming off a bottle. My wife knows, my children know, my 4 girls. Obviously, they've 2 of them have had strange experiences, and I would have thought from 1967. I'm 60 years old, so I was born in 62, so I'd have been 4 or 5 years old, 6 years old. Child don't keep a diary, and I always remember my dad. We lived at a place called Mexborough, Old Dennerby, that overlooked the town of Mexborough. This is in South Yorkshire, and for any listeners overseas or out of area, there was a power station, Mexborough Power Station. My dad was pretty regimented. I had to go to bed at time, he said, whatever. Unusually, this night he woke me up. and he wanted to show me this sphere of light about halfway up the power station, probably a little bit lower down, actually, the power station cooling towers. Huge sphere of sort of lemony white light that looked to be turning. And it went all the way along the rooftops of Mexborough and on towards Swinton. But for me, I'm not saying that's where it started, but then I've got I wrote a book called Night People, which is about my own experiences, and I've not got I haven't got an experience that starts at the beginning and I've got an ending. They're all cameos of memories, and that's as good as I can get. I've not tried to fill in the bits in between with what I think might have happened, because I haven't got a clue. But I can remember, after looking at this sphere of light, and I don't mean the next night, how would a child remember, but I can remember sort of waking up, back bedroom in this house that overlooks pastures and cows grazing, and then the town of Mexborough about 3/4 of a mile in the distance. But I remember my curtains being shut and looking. And here's the thing, it's night time, so how can you even see these things? But it's as vivid today as it was then. And seeing what I perceived were cows' eyes in the curtains. And these curtains were a silvery blue colour. And if anybody remembers, and I'm showing my age here, but people used to buy fiberglass curtains. Seriously. And that my mum had got these all over blooming house. And I'm looking at these, and only thing a child can relate to, you're looking for something that you can identify, to assign those eyes to. And I thought they looked like cows' eyes. But they came out at curtains, and they were beings. This is crazy, honestly. And on and off throughout childhood to being 14, 15 years old, I had this interaction with these things now, and it weren't nice. It were never good. Nothing good came out of it. And it's sometimes, Andy, you wonder if everything's sort of pre-planned in a person's life, because there's loads of events during that childhood that happened, but then it just kind of stopped. Got married, had 3 children, had 4 children, moved to Bridlington in 1993, and it started instantly. I didn't start talking about it. This weren't something, I'm going to start talking about this. The house I'm in now, which I've converted to flats, huge Victorian house, came up, started working on it with our eldest daughter. My wife Mary stayed at home, and within the first day, 2 days, it happened. And me and Sarah, we're upstairs. We're on the top floor of this huge Victorian house, big independent staircase that you can look over either side, 5-metre hallway, 3.5, 4 metres wide. Fabulous. And that'll become apparent in a moment why I've said that. I'm not just boasting about a staircase. This house were a wreck. This house were a wreck. We're on an old mattress at the top of the house. I'm trying to get, as a job as a joiner, I'm just trying to get it habitable. When I woke up at night, and picture a right angle, a corner, you've got a door there, and all the doors were painted with what's called wood grain. The staircase was mahogany, real mahogany, but the doors had got this wood grain. And it was dark. And I think I can see a figure stood against the door and in this 2-foot recess before the spindles of the staircase, which I'm looking out onto. And it's unusual for me because I didn't get up, and I'm looking at it, and it's tall, and I think it's got a hat on. And I'm watching it and watching it. And I remember turning around and looking at Sarah, and she's asleep. I was awake. I don't say I don't need, that's wrong. I'm not looking for somebody to tell me, I dreamt this, or were you doing drugs? Had you done alcohol? No, I hadn't. No. I love beer. I didn't have a beer then, though. I don't think I drank. But so to get to the point, suddenly I realised I'm looking at the spindles, of the staircase, and they're white. And I'm thinking, we haven't painted them white. And all the stairs was an olive green. It's night time, and I'm looking, and they're getting brighter. They're getting brighter and brighter. I forgot about what I thought I was looking at in that corner, this alcove. And Sarah's asleep, and I'm looking at these spindles, and they're getting whiter and whiter. And then up from the middle of the stairs, this sounds bizarre, but there were beings. They were lifting. And it wasn't a nativity scene, but that's what it reminded me of. It weren't biblical. Do you know what I'm saying? It just, they seemed to be glowing. They seemed to be glowing. And the spindles suddenly became like fluorescent tubes. They were that white. And then all of a sudden, bosh, It's white out. That's end of it. That's all I remember. And I woke up in the morning and I couldn't remember it. Set about doing a bit of work for the day, stretched my arms out, and I've got holes in my arms. I've got loads of them. All, it looked like somebody had stuck hot matches all over. I mean, they're scarred now, because over the years it got worse. And as soon as I've stretched my arms out and looked, it kind of came back to me, and that's all I remember. That's about the longest running memory that I've got, even from childhood, of that happening. Then throughout 1993 to 1998, it was intense. Woke up with 3 holes in my back after seeing them, and we've got the medical records, and I've not put them all in, Night People, but I've put what I needed to put in, where the doctors are saying to skin specialists, we would like you to have a look. Young man, they called me then, obviously. We would like you to look at the punch hole lesions that keep appearing on this young man's body every 2 to 3 months. The doctors at the surgery are perplexed and quite baffled. And them's the words, and they're in the book, and that's what they're saying. And they talk about them healing with giant foreign body cells, as though there's been a surgical procedure done. Is there a history of trauma? And all sorts of things. I knew what were happening. I've sat there, and this is before I became vocal about it. I didn't even speak about it, as I've said, until 2015 to Whitley publicly, and I knew. And you think, how do you talk about this? How it's a no-win situation. I've written Night People now. I've got it out of the way. I'm pleased I've written it, and I'm going to speak about what we've called the Night People at the Awakening later this year. So that'll be the first time I've ever spoke about them, apart from on that Whitley Strieber show, and I'm talking to you a little bit now. And so it's been ongoing, basically. A long-winded answer to a short question.
No, but there's some fascinating stuff in there, and I appreciate anyone sharing any type of experience, especially like intimate ones where, you're waking up with marks and, it's unexplained, and it's so many experiencers talk about those, not just the incidents, but also them being uncomfortable, being difficult to live with. But then it's the going forward. How did you find living with those experiences, not only reoccurring, but you're then seeking medical advice, which some experiencers don't, because they don't know where to turn. And then obviously there's the potential ridicule factor off the back of that as well.
Well, you're right. But I need to stress, Andy, from 96 to 98, they weren't just marks that healed. They've left scars, big white scars. And the ones in my back, I had to seek medical attention. I was really worried because I saw them. I saw swirling lights in the bedroom, on the bedroom wall, and there's nothing at the back of this property. There's terraced houses, but the curtains are shut, but there's nothing there. It's quite a long garden. And I could see these lights, and then I could see them in the lights. Then all of a sudden, it felt like a corkscrew were turning in my back. Literally, that's what it felt like. And they're telling me it's a bed spring. I don't know what they're doing. I don't know how it happened, because I think I'm on my back. So how can they do anything to my back? I find that perplexing. I think I'm in bed. Mary's in bed at side of me. She's no idea. Although she's woke up and seen mist in room and small beings once that she told me about. But the next morning, I sit up on the side of bed, no clothes on, and Mary says to me, I don't believe it. She says, what? You've got 3 holes in your back. We're not talking marks, Andy. These were holes. So that's the reason I was seeking medical help. Perhaps 1996 to 98. But I daren't tell them, because I just daren't. But when you apply for, it was Whitley again that said, apply for your medical records, see what they say, you might find it interesting. And they've done drawings. The doctor, I've took a picture, or my wife took a picture of the holes on my back, which we put in Night People, and the doctor, we didn't know, has done drawings, and they kind of match up. And do you know what I mean? So you've got 3 punch hole lesions that travel deep into the dermis. That's what they say about, they're thinking a medical procedure's being done. Well, I don't know what were done. All I know is that these things were telling me it were a bed spring turning in my back. That were about the end of it. 1998, it stopped. And apart
Can I
from...
just ask, Paul? I hate interrupting, but I just want to get in
No,
at
it's
that
good.
point there, because that conversation you've had with a doctor, you've taken those steps further to say, look, this is happening to me. I'm not just keeping it secret. I'm not keeping it to myself and my family. The doctors looked at it. They're perplexed. They're saying that your skin, the dermis, it's got its layers and it's gone. These holes are going down. Is that as far as it went? Was there any chance of following things up? Was there anyone who got in touch with you to look into this further?
Well, what they did, and they left it an open appointment. They tested me for everything. They could only find out I were allergic to grass pollen. Seriously, they just hadn't got a clue. And the last letter, and I'm sure we put it in there, says, "I'm afraid we're going to have to," their words, "draw blank with Mr. Sinclair's lesions." And that were the and we've left an open appointment should he need to come in and see us again. And I haven't done. I haven't needed to. It's for me, apart from seeing odd strange things and odd things happening in the house, which I think everybody probably experiences, and most of the time it goes over people's heads because they're not actually looking for something. It stopped in 1998, and I'm really pleased it did.
So, what was the moment for you that you decided to put this down on paper? And obviously, this would be the Truthproof series, book one. What was that spark? Was it a day, a moment, or was it a accumulation?
Well, I didn't put Night People down on paper till probably 2020. Actually, writing the first book. I don't know. I finished work. And I'm always keen to stress I don't have loads of money, but I'd worked hard and we'd sort of got ourselves into a position where I could finish work, and I wanted to just do this full time. I wanted to research full time, and over the years I'd collected loads and loads of accounts because the Truthproof 1, 2, 3, and 4. There might be odd thing that I've witnessed with witnesses, but the books primarily, I would say 99.9% are about first-hand witness accounts. And I just wanted to get them down on paper and do the witness justice, because I get loads and loads of people sending me information, and some of it, not out of rudeness, I disregard because it's a friend of a friend told me, or it's a little bit vague, and you just get a feel for it not being right. But I like to meet the person face to face, go to the location whenever possible, and just spend some time we sort of winkling the story out to people. You know what I mean? It's full time. It's more than a normal 8 to 5 job kind of thing.
So the title of the book, I said to you before we recorded, is a Glaswegian's nightmare to pronounce. So the full title is Truthproof: The Truth That Leaves No Proof. Now that sounds like something someone would ask me to repeat, just for fun.
Can you repeat that, please? No, but
Will be in the description.
It is, Andy, though, isn't it? It is a truth that leaves no proof, because whether you're a skeptic or whatever you want to term yourself as, I think that the proof of what people are seeing and reporting is overwhelming, even if most of it is anecdotal. It's overwhelming, and there's so many repetitive patterns that come through within the accounts, and it's a diverse population, diverse religious beliefs, but fundamentally they're all most of them are all reporting something very similar. There's a similar thread running through them, even stepping away from the UFOs and to the cryptids, to other parts of this unexplained phenomena. We've got this strange, what I call the lower silence, this descent into this kind of disjointed reality, when, not every time, but when quite a lot of the time we're in a true event of unexplained phenomena, everything around you that changes. It just becomes surreal. And I often wonder, I don't know whether that's the phenomena. We're in the phenomena's environment, or whether the actual phenomena is placing that feeling on us. I don't know. I'm just sort of throwing hooks out and seeing what people think half of the time.
You know, when I've heard about those sorts of moments, or things going quiet,
Yeah.
things just seeming off, sounding odd, it sounds like those places on Earth, like horrible places like Auschwitz, where something evil has happened, and people report there's no birds for miles, no animals round about. There's an odd feeling, an odd setting,
Yeah.
as if there's a presence there, and that's what it sort of sounds like when people have these experiences. Is it time slowing down around them, like you say? Is it an effect that's being put upon the incident? No one actually knows, but there's an odd sensation, an odd feeling to that. Is that something you've experienced yourself, or something you've read more about, or researched more and heard from others?
In the experiences in childhood, that's something I've experienced myself, and I've said, because you're not processing these things as a child. You don't even know that it's not normal. You just know that you're not really gonna. My dad were ex-military, real regimented kind of guy would hit first and ask questions later, which is totally opposite. I'm not like that at all. Do you know what I mean? I don't know whether that's made me that way, but we kind of don't take no nonsense, but we're not like he were. But where am I going with this? When you're experiencing, I mentioned him because I never spoke about it. I never even thought to bring what were happening in the night. And we're only in a 3-bedroom council house. We're not in some big rambling house. He's only in a wall with a 3x2 wall between us. Do you know what I'm saying? And plasterboard. And I wouldn't have dared mention it. I just don't think I would have dared. But every night, when you've had something traumatic happen to you like that, and it doesn't have to be UFO alien related, something traumatic, and we don't even have to say the words, but they are things that happen. You're listening for it, you're watching for it all the time. You can't. But when it comes with this UFO phenomena, this alien type phenomena, it's happening and it's over before you've actually realised it's happened, because you're never ever ready for it. Never. I thought every night as a child, because it didn't happen. I wrote Truthproof. I've just got, I don't know, 20 events through childhood, so it's not every night, and they're all I can remember. But one of them is enough to make you be looking all the time and on edge all the time. But for some reason, you're in the moment, and it's taken over before you even realise. And the event is over before you've realised that you've actually become absorbed into it. It's such a strange thing. I ain't got answers for it.
No, and many folks don't. We've got a lot of questions, but a lack of answers. You've mentioned through the book series Till Night People, they're largely other people's accounts, the testimony, the stories that people have experienced or seen. What did you start to learn as you put these books together and you've researched and spoken to hundreds of different people? Was there any common thread that would go through those experiences? Like you say, not just UFOs, but cryptids and other such things as well.
A common thread, I think, for a lot of places around the United Kingdom is location. If that's kind of thing you're asking, I mean, there seems to be concentrated areas where more unexplained phenomena take place. I mean, I've had people ask me, if you're heavily involved in subject, Paul, and how come you're seeing stuff around Eastern North Yorkshire? I don't think it's because I'm heavily involved in it. I think that the location itself, you've only got to look. Let's go back decade after decade. Go back to folklore, and go back, and it's all there. We know that stories may get embellished throughout time, and well, they will do, and folklore, but there's a grain of truth in these things. And what we've been doing with our documentary Wolfland and these self-illuminating eyes, if we go back in folklore, we've got phantom hounds with glowing eyes appearing on the cliff tops and appearing in the forests of North Yorkshire. Yet, present day, we're getting these things reported now. And people, it's not people who are trying to make a name for themselves. I've had to really, pardon the pun, I've had to hound a lot of these people to get this information and make, get them to come on camera. And I applaud them, to actually put these traumatic events, what they've experienced, and sit in front of a camera and talk to us. But I think it's a common. A lot of the common threads are there. Even by date. For some reason, 15th of June and the month of June seems to throw up particularly in Flamborough and Bempton, traumatic and strange events. And could be coincidence, Andy, 15th of June, 1998, tornado ZE723 vanishes from radar 15 miles off Flamborough Head, which just happens to be an area where the magnetic anomaly is, where the fishermen experience lots of strange things. Not exactly, but in that area. We can't say that's exactly where it is. At the time, I weren't researching it at the time, but the UFO investigators of the day thought this were UFO related. 15th of June 2020, the American Sea Eagle, F-15 Sea Eagle, vanishes similar area off Flamborough Head. 15th of June 2011, a few miles away, the wallabies at Sowerby, we're going to something totally different, at Sowerby Hall Zoo, were decapitated within their enclosures. I mean, it's a strange one, and I could actually talk for an hour, and I actually did on Midnight in the Desert, just about the wallabies, because it was such a strange thing. There were a lot of animal mutilations in the month of June and just after June, in and around this area. It started with one wallaby, and then if you look further, we probably never thought we were going to jump to wallabies, Andy. There you go, got a little joke in there, guys. But we never thought that. But what I'm saying is, if you look then, you find that wallabies, and please forgive me if I've got 2011 wrong and it were 9, but I think it were 11, but all over the United Kingdom, wallabies were being decapitated in small animal parks. How does that work? How does that add up? So then if you go further afield, you go to the Coffs Coast and you go to the Emerald Coast in Australia, those same months, wallabies were being decapitated. And, I spoke to a Professor Allenby, I think it was at Warwick University. He were interested in the potential for alien big cats to be at large in the United Kingdom. And I sent him this information about the wallabies, which he found fascinating. And the guy were really quite positive, but he believed it was a human thing. He thought that people were doing it, and it's sort of some kind of, I don't know, I wouldn't say a craze.
Like it caught on, yeah. I know what you mean, though.
Which I believe is more preposterous.
Copycats.
Yeah, but I think that's. I don't think it's possible. I've seen speed these things move. So we've got first. It brought to my attention with the wallabies at Sowerby Hall Zoo. When I started looking further afield in the Cotswolds, Hanwell Bunny Park, all over the United Kingdom, similar time span, they're getting decapitated. It's crazy. Australia, they're getting decapitated. I know we've jumped about here, people, and I didn't, you didn't start with that question, but it led to it, Andy. I do apologise for talking about something you probably didn't want to talk about.
No, but it's linked, and that's really interesting, and it's something that you don't necessarily hear about. Wallabies, we're so used to cattle mutilations, other animals, other species, species that we hear about have had these kind of incidents.
2017, I was contacted by a farmer. I went to speak to him. I asked, and he agreed to let me look into the sheep mutilations that he'd been having on a farm not far from where I am now. And how did I get to know about this? I went to, there were a vagrant living in Danesdyke. He'd been there. He left this year, actually. They rehomed him, but he'd been there 13 years. We took him some food. It was New Year's Day, 2017. And he told me that the police had just been to see him, and they'd asked him if he'd seen anything unusual, because an unusual dog has been seen killing sheep. And that's all he told me. So I did a bit of digging. I'd located the farm. I went and spoke to him. We can keep unexplained phenomena out of this. I'd love to look into it for you. So I spent 2 years on these fields and woodlands in between 4:30 and 5:30 in the morning, 3 or 4 days a week. Me and that little dog, and braver than meat dog, I think, Andy, And he'd lost 28 sheep when he contacted me. And when it finished in 2019, he'd lost over 50 sheep. And I was finding them, and I was finding roe deer, I was finding badger and fox. Faces stripped of skin, in most cases eyes removed. And why were I going at that time in the morning? Because of the people that say, well, crows will have took eyes. Other animals will have predated on them. That's why So I will get in there. In some cases, these animals were still warm. And I really were there at that time in the morning. hundreds and hundreds of photographs of sheep with ears removed, eyes removed, front left leg for some reason, God knows why. And when I first started talking to him, because I have my red book here, this is the book I had at the time. I don't use it now, but I had this book. And I write all sorts down. And I wrote down a guy called Peter who were walking on Cliff Lane, and he found a roe deer with a 3-inch hole through its side. We likened it to, you know, the hole on a boiler, a gas flue pipe. It looked like that had just gone straight through it. A lovely clean hole, if that don't sound too sick. And 28th of June, 2017. So I'm talking to this farmer, and he's come in, sat in his living room, and he's got his diary out, and he says to me, he said, I first realised something strange was happening. He said, because there were 400 sheep on this field. He says, I've 2 dogs, he says, and the hate going through these troughs to treat the feet. It must be something that's really painful. He said, and they know, like stings the feet, this liquid. Mm-hmm. He says, so we funnel them in. He says, and my 2 dogs struggle. He says, I get to the pens one morning. He's telling me this story. He said, and I can't believe what I'm looking at. He says, these corrugated run, which probably should take 6 to 7 sheep in length, and then they go through into other side. He said, it's got 30 sheep in it. Not 25, not 29, 30 sheep in it. He says, they're all piled on top of one another. They're hung over at sides. He says, and that's happened in night. He says, and I can't understand it. He says, so I unpeg these things. He says, we straightened sheep out. He says, there's 3 dead. Not through mutilation, just through heat exhaustion and fear. He said, and I said, what date was that? And he went, let's have a look. He went, 28th of June. I says, wait there. And I opened this book up. I says, because I don't want you to see that I'm writing it afterwards. And I've got it down there, 28th of June, deer with 3-inch hole in its side, Cliff Lane, literally. I'm not going to say where because it'll locate the farm, but very close, very close. And there's something strange going on. Something really strange was happening. 2019, if we've got time, I'll just stay with this for a moment.
Yeah.
I did my usual. I got to fields early. I used to pull up with our headlights on, so I didn't wake him up, farmer and his family. I were welcome there, but I didn't want to walk the field. It's just getting light, and there's 2 fields, and there's a fence between them, a big gate between them, and field sheep are in bottom field. Well, I open big gate, go through it, and I look up field, and it's just grass. Sheep knew me. I'd been going up for years, and they didn't run away. They weren't bothered about my little dog. But there's nothing untoward. And I do like a grid of the field. Drop into this wood, come out of the wood. Don't bother looking up field. Come out, shut the gate, and as I shut gate, I look. There's a lamb about size of a Labrador. It's not a fully grown ewe or ram. Laid there. I know it's dead. I thought it weren't there when I arrived. Like 2 hours before, an hour and a half, 2 hours before. I knew instantly what it was. So I walked up to it. Now, what I should have said earlier was the farmer said to me, are you going to go up on, what day are you going up on field? I said, I'll probably go up Tuesday or whatever. I wrote about it in Truthproof 3. He says, well, I were up on Sunday. He says, I've lost one of my lambs. He says, and we'll call it number 53. They're all sprayed with a number.
Yeah.
And that might not be number it was. Someone tells me it was 37. But anyway, he says, I've lost it. He says, I've been all around field in my 4x4. My dogs, I've walked field. He says, it's gone. I said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, mate. And that was that. So that was Sunday. I'm there, I think, on Tuesday. Bearing in mind, it weren't there when I walked on field earlier, and I walk off. So I walk up. I knew it were going to be that one. Looked at it. It's not bloated. It's not been opened up by any predators. Eyes are missing, ears are missing, front left leg's missing. Touched it, it's clap cold, but it's not swollen with gases inside it or look like it's been dead a long time. So I rang him up. Said, what number was that lamb that you lost? And he went, I said, number 53. And I said, it's here. I said, but it weren't here this morning when I arrived. What is that? Have we got some human intervention? Because we're in the middle of nowhere, Andy. We're literally in the middle of nowhere. I'm on a private road. I've drove a mile to get to this farm up a private road. There's woods at the back. There's nothing. And that really, it's unnerving when something like that happens. It's like, Will that place there to make me realise? I don't know. Is something playing with us? I don't know.
A lot of that starts to no, it's fascinating. A lot of that starts to sound like incidents we've heard happen in places like Skinwalker Ranch. You know, when you mention those sheep being stored almost in a very tight, contained area in a very unnatural way, that something had to have picked them up and placed them on top of each other.
28th
That's
of
like
June.
when you hear about those cows that were basically put inside a cabin, like a porta cabin in Skinwalker Ranch, and then they burst out of it. They were catatonic, apparently, when they were found. That's, like you say, why would someone, or how could someone even do that? It's a very difficult thing to do, isn't it?
He couldn't believe it, Andy. He just said, that's when I realised something strange was going on. Although then, and rightly so, we should all rationalise and look for what an earthly explanation, should we say. Because when I told him, he went, well, maybe a fox has brought it back. And I just thought it were a ridiculous thing to say, because it hadn't been predated on apart from front left leg, which were gone. Do you know? And there are a lot of similarities to the things. I mean, I've spoke to George Knapp about this a few times, and there are a lot of similarities to the things that have been reported there, that are being reported, particularly at Bempton and Speeton. But I don't think these places are unique. I think that probably they probably need somebody looking at areas where things of an unexplained nature are happening with a lot of intensity, and I think you'd probably unearth a lot more stuff.
So the series itself, and we've touched on this, doesn't just look at UFOs. We talk about all sorts of high strangeness going throughout the series. Orbs, we mentioned missing people, night people. Have you always thought these phenomena were linked? I like your actual phrase, multi-phenomena
research. Yeah, and it's good. I wanted to coin myself that at the Awakening when I spoke last year, and it kind of stuck with it, because I think that's what we all ultimately ought to be striving towards, instead of pigeonholing ourselves. And I'm a UFO researcher, I'm a cryptid researcher, because there's so much we could learn from each other. And I've lost the question. Give me what?
No, just about this being linked and it being your own multi-phenomena research.
It is ultimately linked. We might not know why. I do understand that. You know, on February the 7th, 2019, two military guys claimed to have seen something that we can only describe as a werewolf on the cliff tops at Bempton. They were wild camping. They came across this thing, so they tell me, on February the 7th. We think it rolled into February the 8th. They arrived at 20, and they were in early hours of morning. And, excuse me, what I find fascinating is that on February the 8th, 2020, myself, Bob Brown, and one of my daughters, Gemma, went to the cliff tops. We didn't think, we'll go on the anniversary of this happening. We're all us up there. Gemma, not particularly. She was staying with us for a few weeks. I was Gemma now. She's 38, but she's in between moving, and she was staying with us. And it was a toss-up between sitting at home and watching TV soaps or coming and having a look at cliff tops with me. So she thought she would. And that's what she did. She's not really into the subject as such. So anyway, February the 8th. This is a year later, or a year and a day, depending on what these military guys, or when they saw it, whether it would be 4:12 or after. Where am I going with it? So I'm setting a camera up on cliff tops at a place called, I think, Brill Nook. It's like a lookout in front of these 200 to 300 foot cliffs which are sheer dropped at North Sea. And at the back of us, we've got this hill. And when I talked about areas, concentrated areas within the areas of high strangeness, this place is what I would call a concentrated area. And Gemma's got a big torch she's picked up, and she's shining it. And she says, "What's that white square there, Bob?" I can hear them. It's just chatter to me. I'm setting a camera up. Bob went, "I think it's a board on a fence post." Well, Bob's been up here that many times, he instantly remembered that there's no boards on fence posts. There's no fence. So he put his torch on it, and this white square literally dropped to the floor and disappeared. Doesn't sound like anything that conforms with unexplained phenomena, a white square. We immediately went to area. There was nothing there. Now, it doesn't finish there. We went home that night, and there's a because I've converted these flats, we've got like a little TV room, and then you've got a big living room and a hallway down to a big extension. Me and Mary go to bed. Gemma stays up watching TV. Behind the sofa where she's sat, and it's in like a little alcove, is a brick wall. And behind that is an hallway to our property, so there's nobody in the property. And there's another brick wall then behind that. And above is a flat, which is unoccupied. Bob was in the top flat, but the middle one was unoccupied. I just need to stress this in case anybody thinks it's loud music. So Gemma said, I'm watching TV, just got a little side light on, and I hear a noise and I think it's thunder. And she said, I turned TV down. She said, and then I realised there's a growling behind me. And she said, Dad, it was so loud, it would kind of vibrate in my insides. She says, it absolutely frightened me to death. Now, anybody could say, well, that's his daughter, she's just telling him a story, or he's just saying this. I've wrote Night People. We've got 4 girls. The only person with nothing to say about any weird experiences throughout childhood and throughout adulthood, and believe me, I'd have put it in Night People, is Gemma. That's the first thing she's ever come out with. Now, you touched on Skinwalker, and we talk about the phrase that they're keen to use. They're calling it the hitchhiker. I don't know.
Effect. Yeah,
effect.
hitchhiker effect. Yeah.
Where people have been to the location and they're taking something of the phenomena back with them. And I'm wondering if that happened there. Do you know, there's a guy who comes in our live stream called Rob, and he went up to the old RAF base and he swears that happened to him there. And I want to speak to Rob more. Like his code name, his name in the chat in the live stream is Blue Shift. So if anybody wanted to ask him, just ask. It's not a secret. He's convinced that something came back with him when he went to Bempton and went up around the old RAF base, which I don't recommend anybody going on the RAF base, by the way, people. It's out of bounds, but he believes something came back with him. So I don't know where we're going with that one now, Andy.
No. You mentioned hitchhiker effect, and you've mentioned George Knapp. George Knapp has said he's had the same thing happen, and he's not went into detail with it, but he told me on the podcast I'd done with him last year or the year before, he's been on a few times, that his wife had effects from something coming back with him. Thomas Winterton, the ranch superintendent, has said the same thing. His family have had incidents happen back at their home, and then we've heard from Brandon Fugal and others that it's happened to countless officials and other people who have dealt with the property as well. And this must happen all around the planet. What I would like to know, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to wrap up here for part 1, and part 2 will be released in a few days' time, folks. So if you hear the bell coming in a second, or that UFO soundbite, thanks very much for listening to part 1. Make sure you tune in again for part 2. The question that's going to lead into part 2, though, is, in this time, have you had, during your research, anyone in an official capacity, whether that was police, military, or government, get in touch with you about your research or what you were doing?
Yes, I have, yeah. Coast Guard and police. Police have spoken to me regarding the missing people. And Coast Guard, off the record, have spoke to me about UFO-related events. And there's probably more, because obviously we haven't pre-planned these questions. So off the top of my head, and I've got police officers who come out onto the cliff tops with me and go into the forests with me, who are interested. But as regards military personnel, no, and I'm probably going to kick myself. Something will come into my head afterwards, but there's nothing that's springing to mind.
So there's never been any sort of Men in Black type scenario or any kind of suited officials. It's always been above board.
Oh, you make a good point. Whilst looking into the animal mutilations back in 2017 to 19, Bob Brown was in one of our properties, the top flat, weren't living in that property at the time, and he was coming out with me on a regular basis. He told me one morning he works. Bob's 75 now, so he'd have been in his 70, and he works at a charity shop every day. So I think that tells you something about character at guy. He used to walk into work on a morning. He said he'd seen a UFO. He was staying at a house on a place called Cardigan Road in Bridlington. They're quite affluent houses. They were dog sitting for this guy who'd gone away, and he used to take the dog for a walk on the beach on a morning. And I don't know which came first, because I wrote about it in Truthproof 3. The big enclosed back garden, and this collie dog. He said we sat watching TV one evening with the lights off, and there's a small conservatory in front of a window with a door. He says, and dog suddenly looks up. We'll get to the beach in a minute, Andy, because I don't know which one came first. I can't remember now. He says, now look, and there's a bloke. He says that looks like Zorro. Picture the hat and the. I can see the outline of him. He says the dog's going mad. He said, so I got up, let the dog out. The dog's just running around the garden barking. There's nobody there. It's a big walled garden, fenced garden. Apologies, fenced garden with other properties at the back. But as I say, big affluent houses. And then he said, I took the dog on the beach one morning, and I don't know which one came first. I think the UFO came first. He said, and there's a silver ball over the sea. I'm looking at this thing. He says, I just can't believe I'm looking at it. He says, because I love the subject of UFOs, and we're all this out. He says, he told me all about it. And then things started to happen for him. He said, I'm walking to work on a morning, and there's a big black car past me. And these were just casual observations. I mean, the silver ball he told me about weren't linked to this figure that he'd seen at the door at the time. And this black car, he said it were a big American-style black car past him. And then when he's walking home, it passes him again. So I can't remember exact date, but anybody who wants to sort of Google the World Dart Championships, it was that year, and it were held in Bridlington. And I think we're looking at 2017. And so he's in this house, daylight. He said, and there's a knock at the door, the front door, and there's a small porch at where the people take the boots off, only about 2 or 3 foot wide. So you've got obscure glass into the property, but clear glass outside. He says, and I can looking through this frosted glass, and I can see the shape of two what looked like suited men with hats on. He says, and I opened the door, and they're stood there. He said, and they're very tall. Well, I'm only 5'6". Bob's about 5'2". So they're going to look tall to Bob. He said, but they're very tall, very thin, really white faces. He says, and I went, can I help you? He says, and just open the door a bit. He says, you've seen something you shouldn't have seen. He said, what do you mean? He said, and then they said some more things to him that he can't remember. He said, and in the end, he says, I became a bit frightened. I slammed the door, shut the other door. He'd already put the dog outside in the garden before, as they were when they knocked, because the dog were going mad. He says, and I ran upstairs. I can picture Bob running. He didn't run, but that's what he said. Upstairs to have a look out of the front window to see where they'd gone. It's night. It were light when they came, but it's night time. Do you know? He'd not even picked up on it until we got talking. Do you know what I mean? Said, I looked up and down the street lights are on. Said, Bob, you saw me in daylight. And that kind of gave him a bit of a chill. He didn't want to stay at property after that. I know that's not my experience, Andy. That's just, is it a Men in Black experience? I don't know. Do you know, I really don't know. I mean, I've spoken to Coast Guard one particular Coast Guard who was very high up within the service. And his words to me, and I wrote it all down at one time. He said, you will never find a document, anything worded in any report that alludes to unexplained phenomena or lights or UFOs. I know for a fact that they've they've been involved in what they've called UFO incidents, and it's all been suppressed. I get the information via Freedom Information Request if I get a first-hand witness and I've got an actual date and I can throw it at them. Wilsthorpe, September the 15th, 2009, an old lady in these flats at Wilsthorpe, the 16 flats, just literally a stone's throw, literally into the North Sea. Nothing either side of them for a few miles and just farmland at the back. They were built in 1935, and there's just these 16 flats in blocks of 4, quite isolated. An old lady claimed she saw a circle of UFOs over the sea at Wilsthorpe in 2009. And I've got absolutely richest array of reports from 2009 around that area that I've ever had and ever researched. And the military came the day after, what she said to me was, the next day after I'd seen these objects, her husband saw them as well, He was terrified. He went to bed. He said, I put my head under the pillow. I didn't want to look out till morning. She watched them for over an hour. Sorry, just under an hour. She went out. She went to shut up at late at night. The flats have a communal outside light. Anybody can put theirs on, or it's the same light. She thought next door had left the light on. Opened the porch, looked in. She said, light ain't on, but somehow it's illuminated. So I turned back round and go into the living room, and a voice said to her, go back and have another look. So she did. She said, and then when I looked, she said, I thought, oh my God. She said, there's just a circle of these things over the sea, and the sea's boiling. She shouted her husband. He came and looked. He'd seen enough. He said to me that it frightened him. She watched it for just under an hour. They were moving away in twos. She said, then the next day the military came, and they'd got big searchlights on sea, because a lot of these flats, Andy, they're not occupied year round. A lot of them are used for holiday flats. There's about 3 people that live in them, and they've lived them all, not all their life, but 20 or 30 years. So I thought, where do I go with this? She can't remember a date. But we had a rough idea it was between 2008 and 2011. So I'm going through archives, and I thought I'd found a big cat report. It said, visitors see Lynx. So when I read it, it's Lynx helicopter. So quite unexpectedly, 2 Lynx helicopters arrive on the 15th of September, 2 Chinooks, army vehicles, and they set up camp at the side of the flats. So we know this is the night after. All these things are supposed to be pre-arranged and done in advance. They requisitioned the cabin at the yacht club, which is, it sounds a bit more exotic than it is outside of these flats. It's just catamarans, a tractor, and a big sort of porter cabin.
Yeah.
Yacht club had no idea they were coming. I know that because my son-in-law has a catamaran there. He got moved off. So nothing was planned. They just arrived. They stayed for 2 days. So that's where I got the dates. I put the Freedom of Information request in. They couldn't deny that they'd been there. They're not going to say it's a UFO-related event, obviously. And I've only got this first-hand account from this lady. We know that there's another sighting that same night that went to Coast Guard, but can I get it? No, I cannot get hold of it. And we know that a witness said that she saw orange spheres of light coming from the right-hand side and orange spheres of light coming from the left towards or merging into what looked like a large black yacht sail over the sea. It's a triangle, isn't it? You know, that's what it sounds like to me. And they don't mean on surface of sea, they mean in the air. I know this. How do I know this report exists? Because the Coast Guard has had a look and told me. But it doesn't exist if you ask. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's there. The information is there. There's another one. There's quite a few. It's fascinating. Let's just say there's quite a lot of stuff that I've managed to obtain just by having, as you know, you've got to put the right wording in and the correct year and everything. Otherwise, you could, if you got it a day out and they didn't want to give you information, they're not going to tell you.
Yeah.
But
the folks that put that kind of work in, you know, there's Grant Levac, there's a listener who is in Australia, and you've got John Greenwald and others in the US. Obviously, John Greenwald makes a living from it, quite rightly. He's very good at what he does, and he reports that. I know I've spoken to Jazz Shaw, journalist as well, and he's talked about putting in FOIA requests for documents he actually had and being told the document didn't exist. And he had the document already. And it's just that, like you say, it can be the person, the date. If they don't want you to have it, you're not going to get it.
Well, I'll give you an example. If I can think. Right, June the 15th. Tornado ZE723 disappears from radar over the North Sea. At the time, I were always going into the lifeboat station at Bridlington. And they're very good with me. A lot of lifeboat stations were letting me look through logs. And we're also looking on the system. The guy's not doing anything untoward. I'm just asking him for information. I'm not asking for anything secret. And I come across this thing that said, this is on a lifeboat log, not a Coast Guard log. It said object. So this is roughly the time that the tornado vanished. I think it was a few days before. And it said, large black object seen to fall from the sky, land on the surface of the sea, seen by Hornsea and Withensea fishermen. Lifeboat deployed, nothing to be seen, object. So I thought, right, I'm going to request Freedom of Information request into Coast Guard. I've got the date. I've seen it on the lifeboat log. I've actually got it. I've got it now. Lifeboat guys gave it me. I put a request into Lifeboat and they sent it me. They'd redacted the word object, but it was too late. I'd seen it, so I'm not going to... It was there, even if it's not on the report now. It did say object. That's exactly what it was called. But when I put it into Coast Guard with the exact details, the exact times, no knowledge of it. No knowledge of it. Yet it was Coast Guard that rang Lifeboat to go out. So I know exactly what you're saying there, Andrew. I'm going to call you Andrew, Sunday name there.
Sunday name, get me in trouble. I was wondering, through your years of research, not to keep saying you've been doing this for a long time, but you have, and you've put a lot of work in over that time. Is there any one or maybe a couple of opinions you've had from the early days that just through the work you've put in and the investigations have changed substantially over that time?
Yeah, I would think that the cryptid related part of the subject, never thought I would even be remotely interested, apart from as a teenager looking at horror films and things, thinking, Christ, this is a bit spooky and gets you on edge. I didn't really place any great value on the cryptid related reports. And then,
do me a favour, Paul. Some listeners might be listening to this, and I've talked about it on some podcasts, but depending when they come into different interviews, what do you mean by cryptid?
Cryptid, Bigfoot type reports, people claiming to have actually seen something akin to a werewolf.
Yeah.
And Paul Sinclair never thought he would be looking into anything like that. But, when writing the first book, I got a few reports from Danesdyke, which is about 3 miles from me, and a place called Flixton in North Yorkshire, which is 11 miles from me. Flixton has the oldest report of a werewolf probably in the world, the Flixton werewolf. And I don't think anybody's written more about it than myself. I mean, people talk about, you might have heard about Old Stinker, the werewolf that is said to exist on the Barmston Drain. I wouldn't say all, but a lot of the reports associated with that story come from Flixton, 45 miles away. They've just attached themselves to that story to add a bit more credence to it. But the Flixton werewolf, I've got reports going back to the 1930s. I've got reports from present day of this bipedal fur-covered creature that's said to exist, be intermittently around the area. Andy, I do not think for 1 second that we have something living and breathing that's managing to forge an existence in these locations. It's something else. There is an unexplained aspect to things that of this nature that people are reporting. If we go back to 937 AD, that's well over 1,000 years ago. You've got the then King Athelstan, who in his writings writes that he wants a refuge built at Flixton for the protection of travellers from wolves. Now, we all know that wolves would have been prevalent on the eastern North Yorkshire, all over the United Kingdom in 937 AD, 1,034 years ago. Bears wouldn't have been. They died out long before. So why did I say bears? Because the writing says from wolves and an infestation of savage beasts. Even back then, well, it's not said werewolf. But even that back then, you've got that little weird little tagline. Then you go 3 miles away and you've got a place called East Ayton. And folklore tells a writer called Howard Brealey, 121 years ago, wrote about the Barguest of East Ayton, which the Barguest was a huge, fearsome hound that was sent to haunt the forests and moors of that area. It's about 7 miles away. But we've been doing the documentary now for 3 years called Wolflands. We've got witnesses who were in a forest called Broxer Forest, which is literally 2 miles from East Ayton, who claim to have seen something like that. We've got gamekeepers 7 miles away at Cropton Forest, who claim to have seen something exactly the same. None of these people know each other. We've got about 12 witnesses in Wolflands, first-hand accounts, diversity of people, unrelated, unconnected, all claiming to have seen something very similar within this concentrated location. The gamekeeper, I'm not a believer in all this. But what's interesting, it started with light form phenomena. He's walking back to, he was in his own words, he said, I'd gone a little bit feral. He said, and I was living in a caravan at first as a gamekeeper in 2002 at a place called Stape in North Yorkshire, close to Cropton Forest, 6 or 7 miles from Broxer Forest, where the Rotherham witnesses had their encounter in 2018. He said, and I found he says, you can walk these paths all over the place in these forests. There's 525 square miles of forest and moor. So and a lot of it's never trodden on. He said, but you very rarely go off path into the forest. He says, this particular day, I just ventured in. I'd been working there a couple of years. There's a farmhouse, abandoned since 1956, he found out. Says there's tall pines, 40-foot pines, tight up to the sides of it, at the back of it, and about 30 foot in front. There's a bit of clear fell and then more pines. I used it as a base. He said, I thought this is better than caravan. There's a well, there's a fire. Said, so that's where I set up base. He said, and I've been there a while. My cousin came to stay with me for a few days. He says, and we're walking back along the logging road, and he's ex-Marine, this guy. That'll make sense in a moment. He said, and suddenly a silent baseball-sized light just shoots up at the side of him. He says, I dropped my cousin, our Danny, to the deck, and I expected squaddies to come out because we're very close to Fylingdales, RAF Fylingdales, 2 miles away. He says, I expected squaddies to come out. I thought we'd caught a tripwire flare. Nothing. He says, I came back the next day. There's no magnesium burns. There's nothing. He said, but then, my cousin went home that next day. He said, but then, with the other gamekeeper, we started to hear a baby crying in forest. And he said, whenever we went to where we thought we'd heard this baby, it stopped and it had appeared to start again deeper in. Don't forget, these are gamekeepers. They're not listening to a fox or a cat or an hedgehog that's been caught by, because I don't sound macabre, people, but I've been brought up in country, and an hedgehog sounds uncannily like an infant if it's been attacked. They do cry, which is not nice. But anyway, he didn't know what it was. A few days passed, he's in the farmhouse. He said, and he feels like there's somebody watching him at all times. Right onto his shoulder, he said, it's weird. So I'm laid in the farmhouse. He says, the front door's bolted up, the back door's barricaded up, and I've got a fire going, and I'm in my sleeping bag. And I don't know what time it was, but he woke up, and he looked up at this window, little square windows, no curtains, nothing. He's in the middle of nowhere. He says, and this thing just come to the window. He says, and it filled the window. He says, and it's stooping down, looking in. We've been back, we've measured it. It's well over 7 foot tall. He said it had a monstrous head. Great big deltoids, as he's saying, and it's looking in. And he says, and the glowing embers of the fire, he says, I don't know if it can see me. When it's looking down, I don't see eyes, I don't see teeth. I just see this monstrous outline. He said, so the next night, he said, I decided, in his words, to get the drop on it. And he don't mean he's going to attack this thing or try and shoot it. He said, but if in the clearing where the pine trees go about 30 foot away, he says, I put a tarp down. I got settled in. He says, because I just couldn't settle. I felt like I was being watched everywhere I went before I'd even seen this thing. He says, and sometime in early hours, he says, it came out of the forest and it arrived. This is another unusual aspect to these sightings. It didn't walk. He said it arrived. He said its head was just above the gutter. He said, and it knew just where it were going, and it turned and it looked in the window. He says, and I'm watching this thing, and it thinks, and I've put a sleeping bag in the farmhouse, packed with clothing. He says, so I'm watching it thinks it's watching me. He said, and it's just stood there, and I can see these huge shoulders. He said, I don't remember even seeing his legs. He said, and there's tufts of grass and seeds. He said, and you'd think you'd see some kind of body movement. He said, but it moved just smoothly to spot. He said, and suddenly I realised that I kind of knew I were there. He said, I can't explain how, either that or there were another one watching me. He said, it were weird. He said, after 5 or 10 minutes, it turned and went back in the forest. He says, I sat there then, another 20, 25 minutes, he said, and I went round the back of the farmhouse and in. I would have been terrified. I don't know what I'd have done. I really would. Yeah. I think I'd have stayed where I was. But he went in. The next day, he packed his things up and he'd never been back until he came back in forest with us. He'd been back several times, actually, over years. I think they sell guns at a place a few miles away, so He's still into his hunting and his shooting. So he's been back for that, but we've actually been back and spent nights in forest now. So, you know, it's a fabulous story. What's interesting, and we've not got this in Wolflands, Andy, because this has troubled him. It's only just come back to him, literally, this last 2 weeks, and it's too late now for us to add to Wolflands. The night that they found the sphere of light burst up from the ground at the side of them, they couldn't find the farmhouse. He said, "I don't know why I've never remembered it to this day." He said, "But we couldn't find the farmhouse. We had to sleep outside. We had to build a fire and sleep outside all night," which is impossible because I know where they saw sphere of light. And although it were forested then, it's still only 200 yards away in a direct line. Strange. But you've got this strange. There's so many things that take these creatures, for want of a better word. And do I believe they exist? Yeah, I do believe they exist. Would I have said that 4 or 5 years ago? Definitely not. But I've too many people, good people, telling me these incredible stories. But there's so many things that take them away from a normal flesh and blood creature.
I've said before, Paul, and for some strange reason, maybe it's years of being brought up on Hollywood movies, I struggle to associate the same levels of activity that are reported in other parts of the world as happening in the UK. The same way if I go and watch a film and someone Scottish is on the screen, it's like, it takes me out it slightly. For you, though, is the UK as interesting a multi-phenomena hotspot as anywhere else in the world?
I would think so. But I would also say that there'll be other places all over the world that probably haven't even got a name that we'd know that are just as active. Do you know? I mean, an American guy came through to see me a few years ago, and he'd been to Skinwalker. He'd been to the Hoia Forest in Romania? That's supposed to be a highly charged area for unexplained phenomena. And he wanted to try Bempton. The only place that he had an experience was Bempton. And it weren't something life-changing. He said that he's camping on the cliff tops. He went for a walk early hours at morning. And we've experienced this, what he were talking about. I knew what he were going to say. Well, somebody said the noise. He says, as I walked, he said, and it's very close to where these sheep were being mutilated. He said, as I'm walking along cliff tops, he said, suddenly I walk into a high-pitched sound in my ear. So I step back, it's gone. Step forward, it's there. Step forward again, it's gone. Step back, it's there. And we've heard it. I've only heard it once. I'm not going to say I've heard it lots of times. I've heard it once. There's numerous people being up onto the cliff tops and experienced it. I went up. The time I heard it, I was with a guy called Steve Ashbridge and a lady called, an actress called Kelly Hollis. I don't know if you know from Shameless.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, at that time, Kelly and Steve were in a relationship, should we say. And Steve's one of my best friends. And I just suddenly went, I don't know if you can hear this, but there's a strange high-pitched noise. She says, I can hear it. Steve couldn't hear it. And she'd got her hands over her ears in the end. And really, really strange. And she says, if it carries on, we're going to have to go. It's uncomfortable. But it stopped. The noise stopped, whatever that noise was.
See, off the coast of the US, people report that these objects may have bases, and you'll be well aware of those sorts of reports. The famous case has been the Nimitz, incident. People say off the coast of Catalina, those islands, there are potentially bases. These objects may be kept. Given the activity you've witnessed and you've talked about in the localities in the northeast of England, do you think we've potentially got bases or potential evidence for bases underwater around the UK?
I think it's possible, I mean, I've personally witnessed spheres of light under the water. When I say spheres, circular lights under the water with Bob Brown. I've got lots of reports of lights under the water. And it's interesting because what you've got on old maps, and this will get back to the bases, in a certain area about 10 to 15 miles off Bempton and Flamborough, they say a magnetic anomaly is said to exist in this location. And you've got fishermen who've fished the area for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, never come across anything. And then they'll tell you that this particular day, they're steaming out, as they say. Suddenly, Compass is just doing what it wants. We know where we are because we're seasoned fishermen. but they're getting out to their fishing grounds. But in that area as well, there's an area where nobody can fish, and it's a submarine training ground, which is there's very little known about it. Do you know what I mean? And you've got a crater there, huge impact crater called the Silver Pit crater. And so there's a lot of people suggested that there could be underwater activity, underwater bases. I mean, I'm not in a position to say yes, there is. We've got reports of UFOs coming out of the water. I've never personally seen anything coming out of the water, but I've got more than one report. I've probably got 5 or 6 reports, and it's always in a similar location. It's always off the point of Flamborough and Bempton, about 10 to 15 miles out, that these things are seen. So I suppose there's a possibility.
Outside of the UK right now, I mentioned the US, there are wheels in motion where potentially we may see individuals coming forward to testify to Congress about various aspects of the UFO topic. How much do you keep up to date with what's going on across the water?
I don't. Seriously. And maybe I should, but I don't. I find I'm that immersed in what I'm doing. And that's not to say that there aren't some absolutely incredible pieces of information out there, but that's something I noticed with you, Andy, when when you were talking on Truthproof live stream, our live stream. You're very entrenched in the up to date news. You know what's happening, and I don't. I've really got no idea out of what's happening really outside of my little world. you know.
No, I don't blame you, but I'd love your opinion on this then. So just now, they've passed in their defence bill some language which is basically opening the doors for people who may have knowledge of special access programs, maybe crash retrieval programs, any sort of UFO knowledge essentially, to come forward who may be under NDA or feel threatened about coming forward to talk about the UFO subject in a really serious mainstream way. And I just wonder if that does happen in the US and they talk about it politically and in a more open forum, potentially still behind closed doors. Do you think we could see any impact in the UK from that? That if things do open up more in the US, that you'll know better than anyone, Paul, in the UK, it's just not talked about in a political arena. It's laughed about still. It's reported in a jokey way in the newspaper. Do you think that could help us?
I think it could help us immensely. There's only so long that you can keep this firewall up of denial. I think the internet in a lot of ways has been a great thing because it's just absolutely showed the diversity and the enormity of what people are actually seeing, witnessing, experiencing. And if they're going to have open debate in America by people in officialdom, I think it can only sort of push the cause further forward in favour of more open debate for people within the United Kingdom. It's snowball. It just gathers pace. I think it will, yeah.
I hope so. Listen, I want to get to listener questions, Paul, because you've been very generous with your time already. We've talked a lot about the books, and we're going to get to Wolflands, you've mentioned a few times as well, before we finish up. But we've got lots of listener questions for you. Thanks to everyone who sent them in. I've had to leave off more than half of them. Hopefully, some of your questions have been answered in the body of the interview, but I'd love to have Paul back on again in the near future anyway to get through some more of those. So first up, Paul, a question from Matt Melvin over on Patreon. Matt asks, did Paul ever get to have a conversation with Brandon Fugal about the similarities between his experiences and those on Skinwalker Ranch? Matt said to me he tried to connect you both back in early 2021.
I remember this guy trying to connect, and no, I never did. And I still would, Matt. I still would like to. If you've still got those links and the potential to connect me up, please do. Yeah, I would like to.
I can give you some of that stuff you need as well if you want to get in touch with Brandon. So yeah, hard guy to get a hold of. Don't expect a reply necessarily instantly.
No, but, it would be fascinating. I tell you what I think, Andy. Researchers, and I use that term loosely because I think we're all researchers. If we're involved in the subject, so it depends how much time you want to devote to it, but everybody that's got an interest is a researcher to some degree. So I don't think I'm special in that way. But these places where purportedly the things of high strangeness are occurring, we should be getting together. If I got something fabulous or incredible that had happened up around this location, it would be good to be able to contact the people in other parts of the world and say, look, this has just happened, because they might be similar things might be happening there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We need to be sharing this information. Everybody's too guarded with the information, and I can see in some instances why. I mean, I've coined phrases. I'll get to your questions in a moment, but I've coined phrases in the past, and I see other researchers using them, and I find that frustrating. They're only words. I don't own anybody's words, but I talked about ILF, intelligent life forms, back in 2002. And people use it now, and nobody ever credits you for it. You know, the lower silence, lots and lots of things. But I'm rambling here again, aren't I? So more questions, please.
No, that's fine. And look forward to my new Lower Silence podcast starting next week, which I've trademarked and copyrighted, Paul.
Yeah.
Dave Smethurst, long-time listener, and I'm pretty sure Dave's spoken to you a few occasions at various conferences and whatnot around the UK. He was at the same one we were at and spoke to each other back in October in Manchester. Dave asks, as Paul has said himself, in the UK, it's too small to support many of the alleged large creatures or cryptids seen by many, and you said as much earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that some of these creatures, they may be projections that mask the true appearance of the entity behind it? And do you think that they may pop in and out of our reality?
I think they're definitely popping in and out of our reality is a good way to say it. In and out of our sphere of existence is what I tend to say. And I definitely think that's what's happening. I touched on the fact that we've got 525 square miles of forest, moor, and sort of, I don't know, farming land on the North Yorkshire Moors National Park. Huge area. Could it support a breeding population of what would be, I imagine, carnivorous, 300 to 500 pound creatures akin to the size of a bear? No, I don't believe for 1 second it could. Do I believe that these things are real? Yes. But they're seen intermittently, and they're seen in places where throughout time, throughout folklore, these things have been reported. Incidentally, Broxer Forest, where the three guys from Rotherham saw what they believe they called a werewolf. A Broxer, in some cultures, is a shapeshifter. They're in a forest named after a shapeshifter, which is a strange name. Very close to a place called Hackness, literally 2 miles from Hackness, which in ancient times was called Hachanos, meaning with the whiskers. Do you know that there's loads of very close to East Ayton and the Barguest of East Ayton. I'm not reporting anything new. We're just sort of retreading the footsteps of people decades, probably 100 years ago, have reported these things, and they're still getting reported in present day. Do I believe that they're real? Yes. Do I believe that there's a breeding population of these things? No.
Next question from Harry. Thanks to Harry for this over in Patreon again. What are your thoughts on the NATO human mutilation documentary? I don't know if you've seen that.
Are we talking about Tony Dodd, UFOs and NATO, and the one that Richard D. Hall did a bit of work on?
I think so, because the rest of the question reads, in particular, the way that they talk about UFOs appearing, they could detect UFOs coming into certain areas, and then military personnel would secure landing sites until the Americans turned up.
Yeah, well, if the only knowledge I've got of that, strangely enough, where do you think that, if we're talking about the UFOs and NATO and the ones I'm talking about, what Tony Dodd researched, if anybody's not familiar with Tony Dodd, he was a prolific UFO researcher. I think he was a police detective inspector back in the 1990s. He's passed away now, Tony, and I did exchange a lot of correspondence with him regarding XS894, the lightning that crashed over the North Sea back in September the 8th, 1970. Now, UFOs and NATO, and the human mutilations, where do you think the human mutilations were taking place? In the forests where Wolflands has been filmed, where the gamekeepers have been seeing the cryptids, where the Broxer Forest, all very close. Dalby Forest. That's the only knowledge that I've got. And there's so many similarities to a lot of what's happening today with the sheep mutilations and everything. I'm not sure I've answered your question adequately there, because you may have been talking about something else, but I know that there was something done in the UK, UFOs and NATO, and the actual location where they were doing it is the forest where we're filming Wolflands, and we're not dealing with the cryptids and the UFOs, which is uncanny. Treading in other people's footsteps once again, people. I'm not breaking new ground.
Harry had also asked, are you still in touch with Richard D. Hall?
I haven't spoke to Richard for a few years, so no, I'm not. I guess I'm not, but we were on good terms. I don't know what year it was, but when I was filming the Wolds UFOs, so probably 2007, a guy that lives up on Staxton Wold near the RAF base, a farmer, he has a collection of UFO videos, and I don't think anybody's got more UFO related material than this guy in the world. And he has cameras on cams sweeping 24/7. And he contacted me years ago, and myself and Steve Ashbridge met him not just several times, lots of times, and looked at his footage. And he contacted Richard D. Hall. You're probably thinking, what's he gone to farmer for? I didn't mention Richard D. Hall. He contacted Richard, and Richard came through to stay for a few days and wanted to film this guy. I wanted to talk about his UFO footage, and he backed out. And this farmer guy contacted me. He says, Paul, will you do it? Because I don't want to do it. I were having a walk with my wife and my dog in Danesdyke at the time, jumped straight in my van, and Richard did a documentary off the cuff. Everything, nothing, no questions sort of pre-warned about anything. I just arrived and did it. So there's a documentary out there, a short documentary, I don't know, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, I don't know how long it is, about the Wolds UFOs and myself and Richard D. Hall. And Richard wanted to do some other stuff with me. And at the time I was working, and just timed in, wouldn't allow.
No, that's fair. Question from Mark. Mark asks, do you have any more updates on the Hummingbait incident?
We've got another. That's this. This is probably as big as Rendlesham. It's the most incredible UFO event that I've ever looked at. And every time I talk about it, people think it's amazing. Not because Paul's talking, just because of the amount of information that's there. And if anybody,
can you give us a summary of what it is?
1996, 97, 98, industrial unit on the outskirts of the village of Hunmanby. Hunmanby is featured in Wolflands. It means farmstead of the Hound Man. That's what it means in Hunmanby. And that's the village, and this is the place where people claim to be seeing these bipedal creatures through hundreds of years. So, right, industrial unit on the outskirts of Hunmanby. Back in 96, 97, 98, 3 guys are working on this unit, the boss and 2 guys, and they're spraying high-end motor vehicles, they're restoring open-top buses, fairground rides. June, July and August, 96, poltergeist activity starts to happen. Stones falling from the air, not just little pebbles, handfuls of stones dropping from the air. There's no upper floor to this building. You can drive double-decker buses in it. Huge shutter doors at one end, huge shutter doors at the others. Bottom right-hand corner, you've got a toilet block. Above that, you've got his office. Everything else is open. Washers flying about, like steel washers, hitting the sides of the building. Lumps of wood falling. All the light bulbs flickering and the power banging off in the warehouse, and the radio that's plugged in. You said a brief summary because this is really long. The radio that's plugged in is still playing, yet there's no power on. That happened June, July and August 96. 97 arrives, similar things. Cars with no batteries in parked up in the compound, radios playing. All sorts of things. The boss locks up one night. These guys, the 2 guys that worked with him, this was a second job. They had full-time jobs as painters and sprayers. One was a sign writer in the day, and on a night, back in 98, they're trying to forge a living, more money. They'd come and work with him at the warehouse, and they'd stay till sometimes 3 in the morning, sometimes just 10 at night. Do you see? They'd go to home, have a bit of tea, and go there. 97, similar thing. Boss's wife locking up one night, turns round. There's only a few units on this place at that time. There's a huge, it looks like a Bigfoot, stood in front of him. Where does that fit in with poltergeist activity? He said, I backed up to the fence, took a massive breath, and it just turned and walked into darkness. He said, once again, I only saw this huge outline. So that's an odd one. Huge footprints on the car, but no damage to the car. All 3 cars while they're working there. Right, we got to that's a brief summary of 96, 97. Get to 98. All this has happened. It's like this poltergeist activity. The coins dropping from the air, jam jars falling from the air, old money falling. There's foreign money falling. Andrew Asquith, one of the witnesses, the 2 have spoken. See, I've spoke to all 3, but one just refuses to go any further. Andrew got cocky with the phenomena, as he said, and they all believe he did as well. He said he was shouting at it and asking it to give him lottery numbers. Give me some money I can spend. He said, and I just turned round after I'm preparing a car, and this circle's coming towards me in slow motion, and it hits me in the middle of the head. He says, and it hurt like mad. He says, but it like it was going slow. He says, and I'm spinning round on the floor, and there's a coin stuck to his head. Other two remember it and say it were funny because it served him right. You know, so we're all shouting at this, what they called the phenomena. Now, and Andy asked for an overview of this. I've literally just skimmed. There's tons and tons to it. But it culminated in 1998 with the shutter doors at the bottom of the compound are open. They're about 8 foot, and they're working during the night. And I should have said that the other witness, Dave, his mum and dad used to come over the 3-year period on a night and just sit. They probably wanted to see their son, and they liked having a talk to other two lads. And then they'd go home, and they'd come most nights. And you see, this sort of story seems now disjointed, guys, because I've not been able to go through it. But Andrew says, I walked down to the front of these shutters and looked out into the compound. He said, and there's a UFO. He said, it can't be real. He still says it can't be real. He says it was like a film set. He says, I can hear a noise like an helicopter, but it's not an helicopter. There's something humming. He says, but this is like a classic 1950s, 60s, what you'd see in a cheap budget film. UFO. He said, I can see it. There's a little glass bubble and there's an alien inside it. He said, but it's down compound. There's all smoke and there's electric charge coming off it. He says, and all sorts of things. He says, and I don't know what I'm looking at. He says, it's really, I can't believe it. Then his story becomes odd, and he walks back to the front of the unit and there's a shutter door and a small side door. Opens the side door. Military personnel grab him, drop him to the floor with guns, make him stay where he is. He doesn't move. Can't move. Speak to Dave. I said to Dave, because I spoke to them all individually, and they'd not spoke for years. And the other one who won't speak, or can't say his name, let's just say he only spoke because others had told me. And then I just went into where he works one day. I'd already dropped him a book off. And I went back to see what he thought about it. And he wrote, he says, I said, did you see this little being in the object? And he went, no. He said, I saw 3. He says, and I couldn't see it, Craft. It were covered in mist. He says, I could see the shape of something behind this mist and all these bolts of electric, but they weren't stood together. It's weird. They're all working together in unit. He said, and I could see 3. Dave's about 6 foot, 6'1". He says, a lot taller than me. He says, and they were in tight-fitting suits that looked like wetsuits. He says, and they'd got big heads. He said, and there were 3 of them. He says, I don't know what they were. He said, and I walked at front of the building, an open side door, and military grabbed hold of me with guns, real nasty bees, threatened me and everything. And so then I get to other one who didn't want to tell me much. And I asked him, because Andrew had already said he saw him walking into the mist and disappear. So I said, did you see the being? Did you see anything? He says, I saw one. He says, but I didn't see its head. I could see it amongst the mist. And so my last question to him was, Andrew said that, because if I'd have asked that first, I wouldn't have got any more. I said, Andrew said he saw you walking down the compound into this mist. He said, I have no recollection of that. And that were all I got from him. But his mum, the mum and dad, who, I mean, there's UFO sightings prior to it, days before, triangles. And we've got all that. It's just too big, humming. It's in Truthproof 3, and I think it's about 12,000 words. Could have wrote a book about it, to be honest with you. Mum and dad were driving to the warehouse. There's a military roadblock set up. Not camouflage vehicles, black vehicles. Stopped their car, took them inside a van. They believe military personnel, all in black, armed, know where we live, know everything about us, just basically threatened old man and old woman. They weren't old, to be honest with you then, but do you know what I mean? But they're still alive today, and released them. And so they got a telling off. Now, the question was, have I any more on the Unumby incident? Yes, we've got a guy. They had a small red hatchback car. Got a guy, 1998, driving home. Excuse me. sees a small red hatchback car slewed across the road, old couple looking up at a big black triangle, and he's looking at it with them just before Hummonby. Now, we don't know whether they got stopped after that or before that. There's absolutely tons to Hummonby, just like there is to Wilsthorpe. And 1998, that hillside that we were on about at Bempton, rock anglers claimed that a UFO landed on the hillside. They call it a spaceship. That's 1998. Coast Guards at Hornsey, 1998. When we think it's connected to Hummonby, we haven't got a date. I've spoke to the actual Coast Guard driving into work, says that he's stopped with a military roadblock. Where's Hornsey compared to Hummonby? About 15 miles away, maybe 16 miles away, as the crow flies. And he says there's a big triangle hovering in a field. That's a Coast Guard. Retired now, and I've spoke to him. We think it's 1998, but we don't know if it's August 1998. Prolific year for UFO-related information, or sightings and other bits and bats.
Thanks for summarising that. I know it's a big story to
Massive.
summarise as well. But
2 or 3 hours.
I love the fact, though, that you got 2/3 of the way through it and then said, and then it gets odd, given what you just talked about beforehand as well. It's fascinating. So yeah, thanks for that. And again, people, I recommend you do pick up the books to hear these more and read these in more detail as well. A couple of last questions from listeners. We've got Rachel over on YouTube, and again, thank you to all the YouTube viewers. So hi, because you can actually see this, and to those that are now sending questions through as well. Could I ask if Paul has ever considered hypnotic regression concerning his memories of possible alien encounters?
No, I haven't, to be honest. Well, say no, and then I contradict myself. I spoke about it once to a guy called Derek Tyler. He's I don't know if anybody. I recommend that you try and get him on your show. He's really knowledgeable, really interesting guy. Derek Tyler, American guy. He's wrote Alien Paradigm Shift, and he's wrote Alien Something, The Difficult Truth. I'll get you the names, Andy. And he spoke at Contact in the Desert as well. And Derek kind of said something that rang home to me. He said, you might not be able to remember. He said, because you might not want to remember. You might not need to remember the stuff that could come back to you. But I don't want anything to taint it either, to the person who asked that question, because it would have been so easy to write night people and kind of lie and fill in. But all I've got is my dad waking me up with that first account and looking at a sphere of light going through along rooftops at Mexborough. I've not said in that night then aliens came and stuff like that, because I haven't. Sometime after, Child Don't Write a Diary, Eyes in the Curtains, and just loads of cameos of events. I haven't considered that, and I don't think I would. Thank you.
No, that's fair. It's not a nice thing to potentially have to go through. And you mentioned Whitley Strieber, and his hypnotic regression tapes are available on his website, and those are horrifying. Just the screams alone that come through. So it's quite an intimate thing.
And I know we're probably tight for time, but I'll not say the names, but both my grandsons have had some strange experiences, and my daughters have allowed me to record them, and they don't remember now. These are little children. I'll give you an example. I've got son-in-law and daughter teachers. Not that means bugger all in grand scheme of things, but they're responsible jobs. They kept hearing a bump on bedroom floor. Bang. He's fell out of bed again. They go up. We'll call him John. I think I've named him in book anyway, but they know I've wrote about him. I did get permission. I didn't just do it.
That's fine.
They put him back in bed, and he gets to edge at bed. I said, why don't you sleep in middle of bed? What's the matter with you? Why? And all his toys are lined up on wall, alongside at bed. I used to do this. Action men, everything to stop him. He wouldn't know any of this. He wouldn't have even watched a film about aliens or anything. They're real careful with him. And they asked him why his dad, Nick, I said, why are you sleeping on edge at bed? You keep falling out. It's because of the man. I said, what do you mean the man? He comes through a hole in the wall and he picks me up and he tries to eat me, but he doesn't eat me. And we shoot down through the hole in the wall. This is a little boy. We're not 5-year-old. I think he were about 4 years old. And he's talking about this. Then we've got other one who's shouting for his sisters, or, another daughter. He says there's two blue men in his room. 2 tall blue men in his room. And this happened over a couple of days, and I spoke to him about it, and he said, they float me. I said, what do you mean they float me? They float me. And I say on this recording, and nobody's ever heard recordings, I say, for anybody who's interested, who's listening to this, he's pointing to the light bulb. I said, he's saying they float, because he's real poor vocabulary, this little lad. He likes to play out. Other ones quite switched on. He's not daft, but he likes to play out and just do boys things, and they float me. But these were little lads, 4-year-old, and they've no memory of it now. Do you know what I mean? Absolutely no memory of it. Right, I know we didn't intend to get to that because you're asking questions, so sorry, Andy.
No, that's fair. And again, see, as a father, like that's a terrifying thing. And to some people, and with an interest in the UFO subject, any sort of abduction or experience is just a story, and it's dismissive, and that's fine because there's so little hard, concrete evidence unless you've gone through it yourself. So some of us, like myself, have never had those experiences, but are happy to take that testimony and the story at face value and listen to those. And as a father, that's horrifying to think, that someone's child could go through that, let alone a grown adult. So thanks for sharing that as well. And finally, question from Reed Speed over on YouTube. Paul and another researcher witnessed a light orb or plasma phenomena on an operation in the UK, and he'd like to hear a little bit more on your thoughts of what these could be.
So we're talking about, I believe you're talking about the light, the light form that I saw with Lee Hayward on November the 14th, 2019. I don't know. My thoughts, what they could be. Some people would want to say it's a portal. This thing was huge. It's the most spectacular thing I've ever seen on the cliff tops. I stand by saying it. Lee could be found on social media. You could ask him. He's a real articulate guy. So, I'm not embellishing what we saw. I'm setting a camera up on cliff tops, looking out to sea, to try and film these, what we call the light forms, the intelligent light forms. I turn round, and just in front of the hill that we've just been talking about, in the field with us, is a huge sphere of light. Lee said the influence that the light was giving off was about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. It was huge. And as fast as I'm bringing this camera around, it's gone. And I don't know. You touched on it earlier. I think that these things can just enter our sphere of existence and exit our sphere of existence. I wouldn't say at will, but whenever they want, basically. And once again, to the person who asked the question, I do apologise because I've not answered your question adequately. I think there's loads of people out there, who do answer the questions adequately, but I don't think they know what they're talking about. And that's not, I'm not throwing insults out at people. I just think that there's too many people will be able to, I know what's happening. I'll tell you what's happening. I know these, and you don't know nothing. If you did, we'd all be listening to you today, or we'd all be sort of doting on every word you say. And as I say, that I'm not labeling anybody in that, but a lot of the questions that I'm asked, I am unable to answer because I don't think I've got any more knowledge than you guys.
And do you know what? I think people will appreciate, though, you're being honest rather than you could embellish and you could make something up and you could expand on it. But no,
they haven't given me a
message.
Fair. Do you know what I mean? Some people say, well, I got this message and they've told me where they're from, but I'd rather not say at this moment, but they have told me.
Yeah, it'll be in the next book. Yeah,
no, there's none of that.
Thing. No. Yeah. Listen, just before we go, I want to touch on a few things on a quickfire round. I've not done this for quite a while, but I'd like to bring it back for 2023. It's very popular. And I've done a quickfire omnibus for a few folks over the last couple of weeks while I've took my little break. That was very popular as well. So thanks for all the nice feedback on that. If you've not heard it, go back and listen, folks, because there was a lot of old interviews where guests get to fire through a few topics we didn't get into in the body of the interview. For this, Paul, as few words or as much as you want to say on each of these, usually a few sentences at most, just with time constraints. The first one being the Rendlesham encounter. What are your thoughts?
Something happened. Without a doubt, I think something happened. I've spoke to Brenda Butler on many occasions. I spoke to a lighthouse keeper who was actually working there from Flamborough Head, where I am now. I've spoke to Colonel Holt quite extensively. It wasn't a lighthouse that they saw flashing through that forest, in my opinion. I've also spoke to a British radar operator who was on the base very close to, I think it was Watton, RAF Watton, and a face-to-face meeting where the Americans, he told me, came a few days after the alleged Rendlesham Forest encounter and took away their tapes, and they were told never to speak about what they'd witnessed because they'd seen these objects as well. I tried to line him up with Colonel Holt because he were in conjunction when Holt came through to the UK, and we both spoke at a conference, and he wouldn't speak to him. But I still think there's a possibility that could happen. This guy had just had a major operation, and he lives
No,
about
that's
6
fair.
miles from me, which is uncanny, you know.
Your thoughts on the Dechmont Woods incident?
Once again, I know this is Malcolm Robinson's. He's done a lot
Yeah.
of research on it. I don't know enough about the Dechmont Woods. I'm glad you could pronounce that because I'd have said Dermot or something silly, but I don't know enough about it. But I would imagine that this incident, something happened. But other than just saying that, I haven't got enough knowledge to comment. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. And if anyone wants to hear more on that, I interviewed Malcolm Robinson and we touched on it at that time as well. And you can go back into the archives. The Calvine photograph, which of course in 2022 we saw the original print of the photograph. What is your thoughts on what's contained within it?
Well, it's an incredible photograph. It's just a pity that the people who allegedly took the photograph have not come forward to add a bit of validity, because I know that some better thinking minds than myself have said that this is a reflection, and it does make you pause for thought that it's a plumb bob, all sorts of suggestions to what it could be. I don't know. Not being very good here, am I?
No, that's fine. I'd rather get honesty.
I'll
The next
tell you what
one
I'd
is...
like to say. It's a plug for
Go
Night
on.
People. Malcolm Robinson says that Night People is the best book on alien abduction he's ever read.
And that's hefty praise. And Malcolm was a good guest as well back in the day. I think that was 2021. I spoke to Malcolm now.
I didn't ask him to
Anything
say it.
laugh. Yeah, it's like the old for any. This is a niche reference, but any Alan Partridge fans, where he's got his autobiography and he says, "Lovely stuff, not my words, the words of Shakin' Stevens." So yeah, I don't often get to quote Alan Partridge on the podcast, but a
No,
few
it's
folks will
not bad though.
appreciate that.
Try it more often.
Yeah, I will. Back of the net. Do you prefer the term UFO or UAP?
Don't mind. We're talking about the same thing, aren't we? I'd probably not old school, but probably because I've used UFOs so much, I'd still continue to use UFO. But I've nothing against it. It's a bit like werewolf dogman, as though we have to sort of be in one camp or other. I think ultimately we're dealing with the same thing.
And finally, what does the word disclosure mean to you?
Not a lot if we're not going to get it. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. Are we going to get disclosure? I know we touched on the fact earlier, now that the American powers that be are talking more openly about the subject, and the UK, will it snowball, and will we get that knock-on effect? Will that be disclosure? Will we ever get disclosure? I don't know. I think they just keep moving the goalposts. I think, they'll just make them a little bit wider. They're just telling us what we need to know. So I think depending on what the Americans disclose, will sort of have a knock-on effect to how far we go with the subject. Whether we ever get full disclosure, I don't know. Do we need full disclosure? When there's enough people out there that all know that there's some reality to what we're dealing with, do we actually need do I need a government, an elite power from anywhere in the world to tell me what I experienced was something else, or to validify it for me? As in a way, I suppose. Once again, you contradict yourself. In a way, it would help if they did openly come out and say, we do believe that people have had these experiences for decades and decades and decades, and we do have proof of that. At least, you could sort of, what's the word, hold your head up and think, well, when you sneered and you laughed and you thought, this guy's talking, what a load of rubbish, then you're not going to get it. Just for myself, that'd be the only way I'd look at it. Whether we get disclosure, I don't know.
There's a lot of different ways people look at it, and I thought this was really interesting. Peter Lavender, the author, alongside Tom DeLonge of the Secret Machines books, he put out a tweet yesterday to say people really need to think about disclosure or contact away from being the old White House lawn landing. And he talked about what if one day the whole world had the same dream some intelligence through our consciousness reached in, we all woke up, and that was it. That was contact, and that's how it happened, instead of
That would be
some
fabulous.
spaceship lands.
Yeah, that would be fabulous. And why? And the White House law. And I know that's a scenario that's been thrown out lots of times, but unless some elite power within the world know the agenda and know exactly what these things are, we're being very, very sort of, I don't know, we're being very boastful, thinking that they'd want to land on White House lawn. They seem to choose the nondescript people. Why did they choose a uninteresting little boy in Old Denby back in 1967? Why do they choose people driving a lonely road up somewhere in Scotland at 3 a.m. To make their presence known? Why do they choose people of no real note, and that's not to knock the people, to be the messenger of to bring forward the truth? Do they actually consider us to be anything other than, I don't know, ants? Look upon us with the same kind of intent as what they'd look on any animal within or insect within the planet Earth. I don't know us with that special, really. We might not be. We think
Absolutely.
we are.
One thing I want to touch on, you've mentioned a few times, Paul, I said we would get it in at some point. You've mentioned Wolflands as a documentary that you've been working on.
Yeah.
Can you tell the listeners a little bit about what that is and when that may be coming out?
Wolflands is finished. It's just having the music added to it now. It's, as I say, it took us 3 years. I know COVID knocked it back a bit. It's just first-hand accounts of people within eastern North Yorkshire, up as far as Skinning Grove, which is on way up on North Yorkshire coast, who claim to have seen something akin to a werewolf. And once again, I never thought I'd be going down this road, but I think it's unique. I don't think there's been. I suppose people would say that, but I've not been bragging about the books like that. I think Wolflands is unique. When you see the amount of work that's gone into it, it's not just a talking heads where people sit in a cafe saying what they'd seen, and then you get a flashback to some plastic-looking monster in the woods. We've been in the forests. We've trod the footsteps of these people, and slept nights in the forest with them, and we've got their accounts, warts and all. It's fabulous. Wolflands is fabulous. I'm sorry for saying
And
it,
will
but
that
it is.
be? No, it's your work. It's your baby, and others that have put the hard work into that as well. When are we expecting that to be released? Have you got a rough date?
I should think we're only probably about a month away before we start pitching it. We see what we can do with it first. See whether we don't know whether we'll manage to get it on Netflix. I've got a contact that might be able to get us in there, but we might not as well. But that's where we're gonna start there, and we'll just go with it. But when I say Les Drake's filmed Wolflands, he's been instrumental in filming it with me for the last 3 years. So it's a 50-50 venture. So it's not just Paul. Les has got involved in it as well, Les Drake. And if anybody
Oh,
don't know
that's
Les,
good to hear. The Beatles wasn't just John Lennon and Paul McCartney. There was George and Ringo as well.
yeah, good point.
So yeah, that's fair. No, listen, Paul, you've been great with your time. This has been well worth the wait. I'm sure the listeners have enjoyed it as well. How can people follow you? How can they follow your work? And what's your channel?
We've got a YouTube channel, which is Truthproof, that we live stream most Thursdays at 7:00. Get a good interactive audience. There's over 200 in last week. If anybody's interested in the books, the paperback books can be found on the truthproof.uk website. The Kindle versions of the books are on Amazon, and you can also get the books on eBay. And anybody just wants to find me, Paul Sinclair, ilf@gmail.com. And I'd love to hear about any accounts, any strange stories. If you want to remain anonymous, I'd still want to hear about it. If you never want me to write about it, I still want to hear about it. It's the nature of the game. I don't just want to listen to people's accounts or the only ones I can write about. There's lots of people out there that never want their names mentioned or even talked about. I'm sat on a couple of really interesting cases now, which I will talk about them if I get a chance, but I've got to have the nod to do it.
Brilliant. That's great, Paul. Listen, it's been wonderful speaking to you. And like I say, I genuinely would love to have you back on in the near future
I'd love to
again
come on,
to
yeah.
follow up.
It's fabulous. Thank you.
Brilliant. That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/That UFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFO UAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a tic-tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little ass. Meditative gamma state full on meta. Can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. And I helped out my boys. They thought this was noise. They thought it was a dream. They thought it was my toys. They thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what to do because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jay? But for being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life,